What's up, everyone? So AMD recently released Adrenalin 21.6.2. The previous was 21.6.1. Both are optional driver updates, and you can see they've added support for Doom Eternal Vulkan ray tracing, as well as some additional Vulkan feature support. Not really applicable to the end user that we'd know what they specifically do, but if you're a dev, you'd probably have an idea. And then we've got a few fixed issues: MechWarrior 5 and Radeon RX 6000 in DirectX 11. They fixed some artifacting, an error with AMD Auto Detect and install updates with Windows 7 based systems. It doesn't say which specific GPU, so I'm assuming just the software itself, the utility. And then Adobe Substance 3D Painter had a freezing issue fixed with RX 6900. And then we go back into a lot of the regular, like these were actually known issues that have popped on and off from multiple driver updates that they still haven't ironed out. But the notable ones here would be that they've highlighted an issue between we're running multiple displays with large differences between resolution and refresh rates with flickering, and I think this is an RDNA issue as well, because I've seen RX 5000 and 6000 series owners complaining of similar things. But this is what AMD are aware of, so they're saying it's an RX Vega issue. So if you're having issues on 5000 or 6000, I highly recommend you use the bug report setting. So within the Radeon drivers, there's actually a little bug icon at the top right near the X, and you can click that and literally submit a bug report and give them information to help them raise awareness to issues that you might be having. And the other noticeable issues is blue and black screens with mobile systems, and the fixes to temporarily disable enhanced sign-in, as well as blue and black screens. I don't know if this means BSODs. It could just be a blue screen that pops up, but not actually a crash. But blue or black screens may be observed with Radeon software if you have core isolation enabled. Now, my core isolation with Windows 2.1H1 is actually gone, and I'm not sure if it's because I enabled Trusted Platform Module, which is TPM, which is a requirement for the upcoming Windows 11. So if you look up TPM, it's what is it? You can have, it's Trusted Platform Module. It's basically a security feature that is built into most of the newer CPUs. So if you've got something within the last 4 or 5 years from Ryzen 2000 and up, or Intel 8th gen and higher, you can actually go into your BIOS and enable FTPM under the security section. So after enabling that, I'm not sure if they already had removed core isolation in a previous build. It could just mean older builds of Windows 10 don't have it. But basically, if I go looking for it in my settings, the shortcut comes up, but it's not available and I think it's because I've enabled the FTPM module within the CPU. So if I go to device security, it takes a moment to pop up. I have to kind of go through the menu a little bit. But under here, it pops up that I've actually got the CPU security enabled. There we go, security processor. So literally, while recording, it's popped up right in front of you. So you can see here, AMD, it's built into the R5 3600. So if you're running Ryzen 2000 and up, you can enable it and be ready. Well, be more ready for Windows 11 when it becomes available. But I'm not going to make this video about Windows 11. This is about testing driver performance. And just to note for you guys joining, I've been testing all the way back with my older i7 6700K and RX 5700 system from 21.1.1. And every single driver update I tested was within margin of error for this for the RX 5700. So as you can see, I test with Heaven 1080p Ultra Extreme with recording on most of the time, and 95, from 21.1 to 21.2.1, 97 within a few FPS margin of error, 95 again, 21.2.2, 21.2.3, 95. So I'm going to link all of this information down in the comments. You can go through it if you want. But basically what I'm saying is every single driver update has been within margin of error for Metro Exodus and Heaven for the specs I was using at the time. So as you can see here, from the 17th or from February, when I had the RX 5700, I was on 95.7 FPS and then 95.3 FPS to 21.4.1 with the same GPU. You see here, and then when I moved up to the RX 6700 XT, I got 150 FPS, so the performance improved. But then when I updated drivers again, like from the RX 6700 XT to the next driver, which was 21.4.1 to 21.5.1, you can see it's 146. So literally within 1 FPS, like within margin of error. 146. Oh, there's a few FPS difference there, but I think I was running full stock on this one, and then I also did an undervolt test. So this is what I actually run for most of my 6700 XT testing. So at the undervolt setting, 145 in Heaven 1080p Ultra Extreme, and then even in the next driver update, it was still, I did some RTX testing, 146 in the 21.5.1. So between 21.4 and 21.5, literally within 1 FPS margin of error. And I've tried to include some details of what settings I was running in each title between the different drivers. So now that you're kind of up to speed of what I've been doing, the big notable thing is that on 21.6.1, with the RX 6700 XT, I had a discrepancy with Heaven. Only Heaven though. Superposition was the same as the previous drivers, and Metro Exodus was also within 1 FPS. And I thought maybe it was because they added SAM in 21.6.1. They added the SAM switch into the drivers. So I tested with SAM off, and I still got the same result. But for all other purposes, the games are running fine, nothing stuttering. Even with the lower average, the minimum is actually still within margin of error. So you can see here, we lost around 40 FPS, even though temps and everything are the same, all the drivers were the same, all the settings were the same, and it's almost inexplicable, because if it was a really hard driver issue or some kind of problem where because I install over the top, you'd expect the minimum to also drop. So I'm guessing it's some kind of optimization or power management issue that just came along with the drivers. I'm hoping 21.6.2 resolves it, but just to make you aware, this was the discrepancy. But then when I tested the other intensive games, and this is where a driver specific, like if I had corrupted drivers for some reason or installing over the top broke my drivers somehow, you would expect everything to perform worse. But in Superposition 4K optimized recording on, we were within 1 FPS. So 67.99, 67.67. And same with Metro Exodus, 79.3, 77.15. It was actually slightly higher. So in other words, I ruled out that it's a driver issue rather than a driver optimization specific issue. So we're going to find out today and see if that's been resolved. But otherwise, I'm not too fussed about it. I'm still running 21.6. Because of the SAM feature, I want to make sure SAM's running in all my games, and I'm hoping the driver switch is helping. I haven't had that much time to do specific SAM on-off tests with Shadow of the Tomb Raider and games like that, but I will hopefully get around to it sooner or later. So if I just go in here just to show you, to make sure this is my performance tuning tab, just so you can see my custom fan profile. The undervolt was slightly bumped because of a mid-frequency issue I was having in Path of Exile. Like, Path of Exile doesn't max out the GPU, and at around 2000 megahertz clocks, the voltage curve wasn't stable, so I had to bump it a tiny bit. But that's not really an issue for performance because it's higher, not lower. And same custom fan curve. I'm just sharing this so you can see it. And then under the settings tab, graphics, everything's disabled, all the fancy stuff. I only use Radeon image sharpening, and that's a personal preference at maybe 70%. Doesn't really matter. And surface format optimization, that's on by default. But otherwise, I keep this stuff off just to prevent issues, because there are a lot of game-specific issues where having one of these enabled can cause strange behavior. So I just ruled that out. And if you're having issues, I recommend copy these settings too. And then under display, I also keep VSR off, and I'm using GPU scaling, but I also keep FreeSync off. It says not supported, but my monitor actually does support it. If I enable it in the monitor OSD, I just keep it disabled, because generally you don't need it if you control your frame rates properly. So if your monitor is 100 hertz and you're getting tearing at 105 FPS, if you cap it to 95 FPS, you won't get tearing. And it's basically like that. Unless you can remain consistent above your refresh rate or slightly underneath it, you won't have issues. But if you're running borderline refresh rate, that's where the tearing occurs. And yeah, there's workarounds. But anyway, just to share that. Otherwise, everything was the same. I literally just installed over the top of my previous installation to get to 21.6.2. And you can just see that here, that it just released. It says 28, but I only was notified of it yesterday, or today actually, early this morning. So anyway, we'll get to the testing and enjoy. I'm going to turn the mic off now and just run through my tests. I've also decided to do a little bit of additional testing, and this is more to troubleshoot if the issue with the Heaven FPS drop carries over to other games, because I'll be able to see if they fix it by running extra games in my testing. But I don't know if I'll keep these through all the games because not everyone really owns it. Most people own Metro Exodus, I would assume, and these two did recently go on sale, so that's also part of the reasoning for including them. But yeah, I don't know if I'll use them all the time because I prefer the free benchmarks that everyone can access, even on lower specs or lower budgets. So anyway, enjoy guys, and thanks for tuning in. Okay, so it doesn't look like they've fixed the issue entirely, but the more I think about it, the fact that the minimum's also dropped. So yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know. It could be just some kind of driver thing where they're not focusing on DirectX 11 that much anymore. They're focusing more on Vulkan and DirectX 12. I'm hoping that's not like a trend that we start seeing with other titles, with older titles. But you can see here that the 114 is within 1 FPS, but then we're getting a worse minimum. And I'm not running anything additional. Maybe because I'm on Windows 21H1 and the last driver, 21.6.1, I was using 20H2, I think. So I was on 2.0 basically. And that could have affected it slightly and hurt frame rates, but we'll see in the other tests. If the other tests come up the same, we can just put it down to heaven being heaven and the drivers, heaven and the drivers, basically. But anyway, I'll enter these details, and I'm not going to do multiple runs because that has proven to not really help if, the benchmarks tend to perform the way they perform. 7 and still a little bit disappointing, but oh well. On the superposition. At least as a stability test, this is still very useful for most people that are wondering, can I run these drivers? Is my game's going to crash? Is stuff going to stutter? There's no stuttering. Yeah, like this isn't even something to really complain about in terms of benchmarks. As you can see here, even though the minimum was lower, which is what would concern a gamer the most, the actual score was higher. So a benchmark isn't really the same as real world testing. And benchmarks can also usually show lower results than the actual gameplay. So if I was to benchmark a game with an in-game benchmark compared to actually playing, you'll usually get higher performance when you actually play it, because the benchmarks are like worst case scenario. So anyway, not too big a deal in my opinion. The rest of the benchmarks will really tell the whole picture. So superposition time. Okay. Why is it coming up with 1080p medium? 4K optimized is what I was testing with. It's a bit weird. And yeah, there's not really anything else to change. DirectX. So yeah, that kind of reiterates the same kind of theory I have with the just Heaven being an older benchmark. It's on the way out, I guess, in terms of driver support, unless it's just a bug that they do fix eventually. If I wasn't running Heaven within the benchmark suit that I'm running, then you wouldn't even know. So yeah, at least you can see here that it's within margin of error of the both the previous drivers. So 21.5.2, we've got it 77.15, 102. Wait a second. Am I looking at this right? Superposition, sorry. I'm looking at Metro Exodus. Yeah, 71.85, sorry. And 68.11. It's within a few FPS. That's still margin of error in my books. And then 57. The minimum's actually a little bit higher too. And the max was 83. But then if looking at 21.6.1, it's actually going back up. So 61, 68 to 67, 57, and 83. It's all up by 1 FPS basically. So anyhow, I'll punch that in. Most people will hopefully just not go through my rambling and just skip to the results in the comments. But if you're here, I appreciate it anyway. And yeah, at least you can get that direct comparison to the previous drivers. So these two here, we're up by one FPS. So we're on the way back up with whatever they've changed. And now we'll do Metro Exodus. And yeah, this is what I was looking at before. It just pops out at you. We'll see what happens. And these new ones will just be to compare to the next drivers that release. So these will, obviously you don't have a comparison because I haven't been using these before. So now we need Metro Exodus. That's in C drive, I think. Program files, Epic Games, Metro Exodus in the main directory. And yep, that's the setting I was using. I've got a profile here, 6700 XT. Nothing's changed. And let's go. This one takes a little bit longer to load, but yeah. I wasn't joking, was I? So at least on the stability front, we are doing very good. Nothing's crashing. They're running fine. And I have not scripted this at all. I did not do like multiple takes. This is one take. So anything that goes wrong or any stutters will just be very apparent in the video. But you can see here, minimum 53.89. On the 21.6.1, we were getting 54.51 margin of error. And on 21.5.2, which is the stable driver, we were getting 52. So we're actually going up, and same with maximum, same with average. We're actually up 1 FPS on all of them, which is the same as superposition. 1 FPS up compared to the previous driver with 67 versus 68, 56 versus 57, 82 versus 83. That's a really like weird similarity for two games to have the same gain. But anyway, that's good to see. At least we can be more certain of a driver issue with Heaven, and just Heaven being too old to keep using. Maybe I'll drop it altogether just because it is fairly old now. It's getting on. It is really good to use for, you know, testing clock speeds and things like that, but it is just dated compared to some of the newer stuff. I might even move to some of the CryEngine benchmarks. I don't know. I'll see what else pops up on the radar. But if you have any recommendations, please shout them out. Maybe OCCT, I think they had some newer benchmarks, or 3D Mark I could get onto if a lot of people use it. But I do prefer the free ones that are easily accessible, so it depends on what everyone's using. And now the newer, which will be definitely interesting to see. And the other reason for adding these two is as well because we're on a test driver, an optional driver. I wanted to be certain of stability, and I noticed that certain game benchmarks, the more you test, there'll be that one game that'll crash on unstable drivers. So we're more likely to trigger a crash, and we'll have the application hang if there's a driver issue. And that way I can also reiterate, like, you know, confirm with you guys if there's any kind of instability and recommend whether it's safe to update or not. So far, I'm not having any issues, and I've tested some of the other games, but I'm not going to benchmark all of them. So now on to Horizon Zero Dawn. I don't know why it's doing this. I've pre-optimized the shaders. Maybe it's because I've been running older games and benchmarks. Technically, to do this properly, we have to wait for this to finish, so I'll recommend you skip ahead in this video just a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes ahead. You'll probably be like halfway through the benchmark at that point, but that'll just save you sitting there waiting for it. But basically, if I run the benchmark now, it might not be giving us an optimal result. Also need to make sure the FPS is uncapped. While that's running, just want to check something here with Metro Exodus. Yes, I did have it uncapped because it was a bit weird. I was seeing in the Metro Exodus benchmark, I was seeing it hitting 100 like it was stuck there, but that's just the benchmark itself. There's no FPS cap in place to limit it, and Heaven has no FPS cap either, so we're not getting FPS cap by anything. So Horizon Zero Dawn, I've got 105 FPS cap. That's because the actual game engine runs better with a cap, and it's a waste of, not really a waste, but it doesn't hit 100 FPS with my system specs. It actually runs around 70 FPS or 80 FPS, but it never gets up to 100 unless I'm in the game menu. Like as you can see right now, as you can see there, I'm in the game menu, and when I'm in the game menu, it runs 300 FPS. It's just not necessary, so I put a little cap in just to limit that. But the cap is off for this testing. just to share with you guys that have seen optimization videos, they fixed anisotropic with the full, like the complete edition of Horizon Zero Dawn. It used to not work, and you'd have to go through the drivers and enable it manually, but it works just fine now. But otherwise, these are basically optimal settings to get 60 FPS plus, which is enough for this type of open world RPG. Longer than a couple of minutes. Sorry guys, whoever I told to tune back, skip 2 minutes ahead, you might want to skip 4 minutes ahead. Or another 3 minutes on this. It is going slow. Maybe because of ReLive, because I am recording that's using some bandwidth. It's using some of the background resources in the GPU. So I did not plan for this, this just happened. But when I tested, I did run the benchmark earlier, not for the video, but just to test the benchmark to make sure it was working. And this went really fast, the optimizing shaders, and then it should have already been optimized. I ran the benchmark twice, and you know, I was playing with settings, and it was not optimizing shaders on every launch. I was turning the game on and off, so I'm guessing it's just because I'm recording and then I've launched a few other games and benchmarks in between. So in future, I'll probably want to run this first, in front of all the other stuff, just to avoid this optimization issue. I also tested borderless in full screen, and there was basically no difference. So yeah, I use borderless just because I multitask a lot. Just wanted to share this GPU Z screen too, because I'm sure there'll be a few people staring at that hotspot thinking that can't be the hotspot, because with the older 5000 series RDNA cards, the hotspot was unreasonably hot a lot of the time. And at least on this Gigabyte RX 6700 XT, which is completely stock, I have not modified it at all, like no backplate mods, no thermal pad mods, nothing. And with the fan curve I run, which is showing 66% with the current menu load, that's the hotspot. It is really really good. Like you can see here, it's within a few degrees of the normal GPU current temp reading, which is edge temp, and then hotspot is the closer to the center of the die, like the hotspot. So yeah, anyway, just so you can see that. And we can also see here resizable bar is enabled, and PCI bus interface is on 3.0 forced through the BIOS because I'm on B450M Mortar Max. Just to share that. Almost done.
go. 60 FPS. 60 FPS on the CPU and GPU. There was minimum of 41, but otherwise, I mean, it looks good. You would, don't think we'd get any stutter from this. So, anyway, we'll still go by the combined scores. So minimum 41, max 149, and just put that in there just to have a reference. Average 83. That's actually good. Average max. Yeah, like that. Now AC Odyssey. And also factor in that I'm recording, so there is a slight FPS hit for that as well. One more thing I wanted to make you guys aware of, if you think these results are a little bit off, it's because of the way that a lot of reviews and benchmark sites test CPU bottlenecks in this game. What they do is they turn all the settings down to low or medium, and then they benchmark thinking that's going to show the worst CPU performance, like, you know, bottleneck to CPU. But in reality, if you're running a good enough GPU, you'll actually get higher CPU load by having certain settings turned off. So running, I'll show you here, environmental detail with more objects on very high is actually a lot more intensive on the CPU than running on medium. So when they're using medium preset for their benchmarks, you're going to see higher, you know, overall results and better scores. But you'll notice in this benchmark here when I run it is that I'm actually getting a little bit of a CPU bottleneck with the 1% lows. But it doesn't really cause any stutter though, so it's not something I'm worried about. Plus we're running ReLive at the same time. But it's just so you guys are aware that if you think the results are a little bit abnormal, it's because the CPU benchmarks literally do use medium preset. And so they've got environmental detail down, there's less objects, there's less CPU load, and it just depends on the GPU as well. If the GPU can handle it, you'll still end up CPU bottlenecked even at higher settings. So that's what I believe is happening here, and you'll actually see the 6700 XT not holding a high utilization. You'll see the utilization dropping here and there, and that's the R5 3600 holding it back a bit. But the main reason we're doing this is to test stability in drivers anyway, so, you know, it's not all about the CPU, but I just want to make you guys aware of that. And I think it's unique to the benchmark itself, because when I actually play the game, I don't get any, you know, severe or noticeable FPS drops. It's also the angle that the benchmark runs the camera in. So you can see these settings here. These are basically optimized for, you know, best visuals and best performance. So fog's turned to medium. I do still want some fog in my games, and this doesn't really affect the benchmark. And SSR is still on high because it does make water, like, medium and low don't look that good for proper screen space reflections of terrain in the water. And volumetric clouds medium because it is a massive performance boost, and turning it down to low literally turns volumetric clouds off. So we do still because there's a lot of views where you climb up really high and you can see the clouds. So yeah, and this turned down a notch. But basically hardware on box optimized. And you can see here 3440 by 1440. Basing's off. You'll use it afterwards. So you can see that's not too bad. 64 FPS, more than playable for this type of game. The frame times for the CPU and the GPU, the latencies were both within 1 ms of each other, so that's like no noticeable stutter or bad issues. There's built-in like FPS drops in the benchmark itself, and I think these are just magnified by the fact that it's an R5 3600, or there's something to do with the drivers, possibly, because I don't know. I haven't been testing this benchmark through all the driver updates. We'll only find out after like 3 or 4 more driver updates, then we'll know if there was something they fixed or not. But otherwise, I mean, it's still more than playable. And my last run, it's down 8. That's with recording off. So I just wanted to share. I ran this prior with recording off just for my own testing, not for a video, but just to see how this benchmark ran. And with ReLive off on the same drivers, it was getting 8 FPS higher on the minimums. And one other thing I discovered, if for you Odyssey players, people that are actually playing Odyssey, if you get any stutter or low FPS issues, this game running uncapped runs worse than if you cap the FPS. If you cap the FPS, instead, like for example, if you get around, even if you get 60 FPS average, and you're running uncapped, if you cap the FPS to say 70, your actual average may improve in my own testing. So as you can see here, the minimums are 24 with the FPS uncapped. I'm not sure how this will handle with ReLive though, but if I cap the FPS to, instead of uncapped, I go to 75 FPS cap, we should see improved minimums. And because this benchmark is not that long, I'm going to actually do that on this video real quick. So I'm enabling the FPS cap. You can see it locked to 75 now. It does still drop during the benchmark, but what I mean is the minimums will be improved, and that should be a good thing. If your 1% lows or your minimums are higher. But it can also show that the game runs smoother that way. I also tried different FPS caps. I tried like 90, I tried 60, I tried all different numbers, and I found you don't want to cap it on exactly your minimum. Like, you don't want to cap, if your average is 64, you don't want to necessarily cap it at 60. You want to cap it a little bit above, but not uncapped, and not too high. So, 90 is kind of pointless because it never really reaches 90 unless it's a maximum. And 100 is definitely pointless for this setup at this resolution. So you have to kind of test for yourself. But 75 is what I settled on after testing higher and lower. Basically, like I even tried 80 and 70. And 75 was just giving me the best, most consistent result. But I'm still not 100% sure. I haven't done the ReLive test for that. It might not even make any difference with ReLive running. Like ReLive might hit the performance hard enough that I'll still get a FPS. The minimum will still be a bit down, even with the FPS cap in place. So yeah, as you can see, putting an FPS cap, even though I wasn't hitting 75 in the first place, or even anything above that, like I wasn't really hitting 80 or 90, I think there are spikes that you can't really notice that actually are spiking up to 70 or 80 plus. You just can't see them in the benchmark, and capping it a little bit lower just improves overall performance. So because it lets you compare to the last run, you can take a look at this: 62, 33, 92. And then I've capped it to 75, so obviously the max is going to be 75, but the minimum. So we're up by 9, which is definitely desirable. You'd rather have 9 plus on your minimums and lose 6 on max and a little bit on your average than to have a lower minimum, because minimum's where the stutter and the performance issues are. So, you know, if your minimum was 60, you'd never ever have FPS drop. But yeah, I just wanted to share that for the people that do play Odyssey and have had any kind of performance issues. Use Riva Tuner, add the exe to the to your Riva Tuner. You know, add it like this. Find your directory, and set an FPS cap, frame rate limit 75 or whatever amount. And you can even set a hotkey to turn it on and off. So I don't know if I set the hotkey in here or in MSI Afterburner. Or was it? Yeah, I think it's in MSI Afterburner. So settings, and then here we go. Toggle frame rate limiter F10 or whatever button. You know, just so you know where to set it. It's in the on-screen display section. So yeah, that's what I'll recommend for this game. Bit off topic, but I wanted to share that since it is a game we're testing, and also running in full screen mode does seem to help the performance a little bit, but not as much as the FPS cap. The FPS cap is more important. So anyway, but I use both. So I use both full screen and the FPS cap together to get optimal results. But just for a quick test, seeing as I've already backed out of the results anyway. This is all going to be timestamped in the video for the people that don't want to hang around, so I'm not too talkative making people sit through a bit longer because you can just click ahead. But I'm also going to run the benchmark just so we have one more comparison of the exact, with the FPS cap and everything. Best case scenario, if borderless will give a significant FPS hit. So one more test. And these are actually what I'll use in future videos. If I benchmark this game again, because this is what the GPU is capable of, there's no point running uncapped if capped has better performance. So I will be capping it at 75 in future videos, and unless the maximum and the average are hitting 75, there'll be no reason to uncap it, because it just runs better this way. Actually not too bad. You could even call that margin of error, really. 2 FPS down on the minimums, but if you like to multitask, it's not going to make that big a difference. So, full screen, borderless. I think I'll just keep it on borderless because I do tend to alt-tab a lot. Like, in between gaming sessions, I'll be playing a bit, I might go get a drink, and I'll quickly alt-tab out, check some stuff, and then go back to playing. So it's kind of like, I think a lot of gamers probably do that kind of thing. They take a quick break and, you know, check your Facebook and things. But anyway, I will enter these results just so that we have something and we can check up on it later. I feel bad putting in the max because I feel they're so irrelevant to actual performance. Like, you don't run at your max, it's just a peak momentary spike that's not really relative to gameplay. But just for the sake of seeing it, I guess. So this is optimized borderless. This was also borderless because I tested Horizon Zero Dawn, made no difference. It was more an AC Odyssey thing where it slightly matters, but not really. The FPS cap alleviates the. If you run uncapped, you might get a bigger FPS hit though. You'd be down at 22 or something. So yeah, that's about it. Yeah, all this will be down in the comments below. I'll probably just try to timestamp everything to make it a lot easier for people to navigate. And thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if this helped you out. And as you can see, the drivers are very stable. My system's running fine. I'm recording this entire 1 hour video. So yeah, I hope that helps you guys out in deciding whether it's worth upgrading or not. If you want the SAM enabled switch, then and the FSR support, then obviously there's no harm in upgrading from 21.6.1 to 6.2. Like, it's perfectly fine. So thanks for watching, guys. See ya.